morning and welcome to a special Facebook Live edition today. We are here in recognition of Diabetes Alert Day, which is a special day intended to raise awareness of the seriousness of diabetes, especially when it's left untreated. So I am Deanna Squires, Enloe's Community Outreach Coordinator, and I'm joined here by our outpatient registered dietitian, Mary Aram. So thank you, Mary.
More than welcome. Food stores are great.
I know, it's super fun. So we're switching things up here a little bit. We are coming to you live from Rayleigh's. We're going to take you on a bit of a shopping trip, teach you some things about how to make some healthy choices, read some nutrition labels, especially for those of you who maybe have been told you have pre-diabetes, or even if you have type 2 or type 1 diabetes. A lot of these nutrition tips will apply. So a couple of things we want to talk about today. Number one is this is a little bit different format than we're used to, and so we're going to do our very best to still monitor the questions and comments as we go. But it's a little hard because we're going to be walking through the store. So if you want to, post your questions, post your comments. We'll do our best to answer them as we go. We may have to respond to them after those, so fear not, we will get back to you on them, and we do want your interaction as much as we can. Also, as a reminder, not only are we not giving medical advice, we want you to talk to your healthcare provider if you have any specific questions and concerns, but we also are not here endorsing any particular store, any particular products. This really is more education. We want to give you some really helpful tips that you can use no matter where you shop, no matter what your dietary needs are, but this is just to give you a little bit of guidance and maybe some insight and some tips that you can use.
Sounds great.
Okay, so with that, let's go shopping.
Okay.
So first of all, what is Diabetes Alert Day? Why is it so important?
Well, diabetes is a really significant health problem for many Americans. Probably, I think the statistics now are almost a third of Americans have pre-diabetes. Many of them, about a third of them, aren't aware that they have pre-diabetes, which is a condition that occurs in the run-up to diabetes. And so we try to find, the American Diabetes Association, the American College of Endocrinology, the national government tries to find ways to bring diabetes and the lifestyle aspects of diabetes to the American public. National Diabetes Alert Day is one of those. In November, we also have a whole month that we dedicate to being aware of diabetes and the risk that it poses in people's health.
Yeah, super important. And it's interesting too, I'm so excited about today because in a lot of our other Facebook Lives we've done, we've talked about colorectal cancer and heart disease and obesity, and this really affects so many of those. So it's so widespread and important information to manage and control.
Absolutely. Diabetes is a condition in the body that can have a very adverse impact on many other medical conditions. It's a pro-inflammatory condition, and it makes it hard for the body to be well, whether they have other conditions or just they're trying not to get sick with anything.
All right. So let's head into the fruit and veggie aisle. We'll talk about veggies first, since that we are coming into all the apples. Here, we're going to take you around this way. Steer in the right direction. Yeah. So, fruits. Are all fruits created equal, or are there certain fruits that might be better for somebody who's trying to manage their blood sugar levels?
Well, fruits are a healthy choice a lot of the time. They aren't always the best choice because there are versions of fruits that we've made over the years, processed fruits, dried fruits that we put in cans. But when it comes to fresh fruit, most all fresh fruit choices eaten in moderation. Important part of that sentence.
Repeat that a lot.
In moderation are great choices. So in other words, 10, 15 grapes, not 2 handfuls or a whole,
not a whole
pound of grapes. But grapes would be one of those ones that I would limit if I had a blood sugar problem. I'd be careful and maybe not use grapes as much. Often the fruits you want to focus on when you have a blood sugar problem are going to be berries, especially in-season berries. If you can't get in-season berries, it's important to get maybe frozen berries. The other thing that's important to consider when it comes to fruits and vegetables is the amount of pesticide exposure, how those vegetables and fruits are raised. So we live in a wonderful part of the country, and so trying to eat in season whenever possible helps you limit that exposure as well. So berries work, stone fruits work in season. So that would be, for people who don't know, apricots, nectarines, plums, peaches, which we have a wonderful industry very close by, but they are out of season right now. So in season right now, I would pick apples, I would pick pears, I would pick kiwi, pomegranates. Bananas are a wonderful, affordable thing that's there all the time for us, but banana is a very high starch, very high sugar type of a fruit. So for people who are trying not to have a blood sugar problem, people that know they've got a blood sugar problem, they're one that they need to be more accountable for, be careful about. I tend to encourage my clients with diabetes or with versions of illnesses that relate to diabetes to maybe include those when they're going to be very active, or when they're fueling physical activity before or after, because their body can chew that up, chew right through.
Right, gives you a boost of that energy.
Right, you can use that glucose at that time.
Right. Yeah. So let's move on a little bit more. We'll head back to the back of the produce section into the veggies. So what about veggies? Are there certain ones that are better for managing blood sugars or not?
There are. As a rule, the term we use a lot when we're talking to people is we talk about non-starchy versus starchy vegetables. It's something a term that people tend to understand. But cruciferous vegetables, so broccoli and cauliflower, those types of vegetables, cabbage are going to be always wonderful. Salad vegetables for people who don't want to get into the weeds or the details of it. Salad vegetables, and always eating a vegetable that is more lightly cooked will always serve you. So things like carrots are always, because they are a starchier or a higher sugar content vegetable, eating those raw,
The crunchiness.
it makes it less able to be converted to glucose in the bloodstream, requires less insulin, which are really important. Vegetables to probably limit and be careful about are going to be potatoes. So we have a nice picture of potatoes there. Generally, you would want to stay more with the smaller red, purple, or this much smaller fingerling-sized potato, because there's a starch that doesn't turn to sugar as readily. If anybody had wondered where did all of these small little potatoes come from, that's one of the reasons, as manufacturers have figured out, that people somewhere along the line decided that these small vegetables, the small starchy vegetables, work well. From a nutritionist or a dietitian standpoint, the advantage is their glycemic or their blood sugar requirement in the body is much, much lower.
Plus, they're so cute. What about corn? Corn's pretty high starchy vegetable, right?
Corn, so it's intriguing that they have corn and potatoes here together. Corn is a wonderful food, but again, it's like if I had to maybe find an analogy, it's very like the banana we just talked about. It has a very high glycemic effect in the body. So you might be choosy. The other thing that always limits the corn intake in my family is where it's raised. It's one of the crops that has a lot of genetically modified seed stock in it.
Oh, right.
So that doesn't necessarily change its glycemic impact, but it does mean that as a crop, it gets a lot of spray. It's a monocrop versus a variety of crops. So we're just choosy. We eat it in season. We eat it if it's someone more close to us grow it, and then it doesn't mean I don't get it when my husband says, you know what, we're grilling tonight, I want some corn, and I'm careful about how I put it into the meal. Because same with the potatoes, how I put it in the meal.
Actually, in the summertime especially, I like to cut it off the cob raw and throw it in my salad.
Throw it in salads is very good, because at least then you're not cooking that starch.
Right.
And then you're mixing it in. Yes, and you're mixing with things that won't turn to sugar as readily. Yeah, that's a great way.
So you've mentioned glycemic index a few times now. So for those people watching at home who may not know what that means, what is glycemic index?
So the glycemic index is a ranking of a food's ability to elevate your blood sugar, demand insulin in your body. That's the ranking system of overall a food's glycemic effect. Glycemic is a fancy word for blood sugar effect or insulin requiring effect. So if a food has a high glycemic effect, it's going to turn to sugar very readily in your body. It's going to demand a lot of insulin. And insulin is a wonderful hormone. It does a lot of wonderful things for us, but having too much insulin, too much of the day, has adverse effects for the body, inflammatory effects for the body. So we want insulin in just spurts when it's needed.
Right, just to give us enough energy to keep going and have a good day and then bring it back down.
Right, exactly. So that's the ranking system. There's a bunch of different ways to look at that. When we see people at the medical center in the outpatient setting, we try to give them some general terms or general ways to understand. These are higher in glycemic effect. These are lower in glycemic effect. These are some ways to take a high glycemic effect food and put it in a low glycemic effect meal, or change how it's going to.
We're going to talk about that here in just a bit.
Exactly.
So last question about fruits and veggies before we move on. How many servings of fruits and vegetables should people have on a daily basis?
Don't shoot the messenger.
Lots. The answer is lots.
A lot. And the best way to start is to at least get one a day. That's kind of where I start with clients. Even we get pregnant moms who are trying to prevent a blood sugar problem or treat a blood sugar problem. So what I usually tell people is anytime you get one of the low glycemic effect vegetables in a meal, you will have better blood sugars after that meal. So the true answer, and I'm being a politician and answering this, is 4 cups a day. It's 7 to 9 servings. A serving is a half a cup. A half a cup is the size of a tennis ball, or half a tennis ball. So a cup is the size of a tennis ball.
Or like I've heard you can kind of go the size of your fist is
well,
sort of a gauge.
You could, but I bet all of us have
Smaller
husbands
fists.
or males in our life. You know, I finally figured it out. I had a client one day, and he said, "Oh, you mean like this?" And he had a paw the size of a grizzly bear. I'm like, no.
Then you only need 4 or 5, not 9.
Yeah. So it's 7 to 9 servings or 4 cups. And so the strategy I tell people is just the way to not get daunted by that is just to say, every meal, is there a vegetable I could put in here? Is there a vegetable I could put in here? And it's just a matter of kind of telling yourself to work on that. I've got my husband, you know, even when pizza comes up, he's like, I'll run to the store and get asparagus. I'm like, wow, okay.
You've done good.
We've got it figured out now. So it's a matter of just trying to, you know, and maybe call a dietitian, or, you know, we can get some resources up online. There's lots of different ways and ideas, but the answer is vegetables almost every meal, or every meal if you can make it every meal, and try to think of vegetables more than you think right now.
And we do have the farmers markets, and we have the one every Saturday, the Thursday market starting up here, I think, next week. So there'll be a lot more opportunities to go and get those local ones, especially that you've been talking about.
And sometimes I'll get those even when I haven't been thinking about them, but I walk down the aisle and it's so beautiful.
It is so pretty.
Okay, I'm gonna have eggplant today, you know, just because it's, you know, so it is a great time to try to find those locally.
Nice. How about if we head back to the dairy section?
All right.
So we'll walk back to the far end of the store. While we're walking, we'll be going through the frozen food aisle.
Before we go, I want to mention Rayleigh's has a wonderful greens section. They have some of the best prices in town. They have an excellent organic section. Maybe on our way by we can videotape that. So this is the spot I come to get my chard, to get my kale. There's just and it's also, you know, it's actually pretty,
and look at the pretty
well put
carrots
together too. You know, so anytime, another way to think about vegetables is the more color you get, the more the better you are. So, you know, things that are colorful are going to offer you nutrients that we're not really talking about in terms of glycemic effect, but color means a lot when it comes to a vegetable or a fruit's contribution to your diet. But this is a really good spot in town to get greens, and I think a lot of people might not know some of the best prices and some of the best.
So I'm curious. This.
That's called broccolini.
Broccolini?
I think it's...
There's so many fun vegetables. You just never know.
I think they have another tag over there too. They also have the yellow cauliflower over there.
I've had
too.
yellow cauliflower, yes.
And they had it on
our
sale.
cafe does that. They do this rainbow cauliflower. It has white, yellow, and purple cauliflower.
And the other thing that sometimes they have, and you don't see it here, is if you ever see broccoli sprouts. Broccoli sprouts have extra amounts of powerful chemicals that are very good for our body fighting inflammation. So broccoli sprouts are an excellent thing to consider. Also, always trying to pick the crymines and the oyster mushrooms and shiitakes. The white buttons are yummy and fine, and they fill in a recipe or something like that. But if you're looking to get some nutrition from a mushroom, you want to pick things that have weird shapes, darker colors, and maybe a little funny taste, but they offer you a really powerful phytochemical that's not in other foods.
Nice. Yeah, it can be very creative. It's good to kind of experiment sometimes, because you never know what you're going to find.
And on our way out, you'll also notice when it comes, we didn't talk about squash, but we have an end cap here with squash. And I don't know about you, but I grew up with, my butternut squashes were like baseball bats, and just, you know, spaghetti squashes look like double-sized footballs. If you take the concept of smaller, remember we were talking about the potatoes, so if you think about smaller, younger starchy vegetables, that's where some of all these small starchy vegetables have come from, because the smaller starchy vegetable is, the less it digests to sugar.
Oh, nice.
It has a lower glycemic effect.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now we're in frozen foods.
Now we're going through the frozen.
And you have to be strong.
You do.
through the desserts.
We're gonna pass by the ice cream.
And the dried fruits are over here as well,
Dried fruits and
which
some
are
other
a
snacks.
higher glycemic effect way to get some nutrition. So they really work fine, but you again need to, the way to control how that kind of food might influence blood sugars and insulin is be choosy and careful about the amount.
Okay, so really be mindful of the serving size.
I even keep a bunch of the little small souffle cups that you get to salad dressings at our house. And whenever I get some of my raisins or some of my favorite dry fruit, I don't make myself walk away with just a little.
Just a little snack.
Don't sit there with the bag open.
That's dangerous of anything.
It is. In this section, though, you can, this is a good section to target. This is the frozen berry section. So if you can make it past all of the ice cream, which is not inherently problematic, we'll talk about that later. Frozen berries are a great way to get berries off season. They'll have high amounts of the types of nutrients you want out of them. You'll avoid most of the chemicals, especially if you buy organic. So always check this section out. There's usually something on sale.
Nice. And then another question as we're going by, juice. So a lot of people like juice. How does that compare to eating the fresh fruits we were just talking about?
Well, like back at the beginning of this, we talked about, what were a better choice, and I singled out, unfortunately, fruit from the very beginning, or fruit juice, my apology. When you take all the sugar out of a fruit and you deliver it to your body all at the same time, your body is awash in digested glucose or glucose available. And so if you have an insulin utilization problem and you're trying not to get, a lot of insulin into the bloodstream all at the same time to take care of how fast liquid juice or liquid fruit delivers, juice is something you have to be really careful about. I think all of us grew up drinking juice in the morning. I always had orange juice when I grew up. But now I just know it is something that generally makes me hungry. It's hard for me to drink enough to feel satisfied. Those are all hallmarks of a high glycemic effect food. So even when you juice it on your own, this is the part that really bums out my clients sometimes. It's like, well, I can't have a smoothie. It's like, not if you're going to use a lot of fruit in it. No, you should be. Maybe you could juice greens, and we can talk about new ways you could do that. But be very cautious. Again, something you might use in its diluted form around, strong physical activity, or your body can chew up, or it might be a perfect thing for a child or an individual that really doesn't have a very high risk for a glucose disorder or glucose regulation disorder.
So one thing I do want to bring up is when you look at the juice section like this, there's so many great juice choices, right? It looks all healthy except for the high sugar that we've just been talking about. But they're not all 100% fruit juice, right? You've got juice cocktails. So what should people look for if they are going to go with a juice option? What are the keys?
It should really just say 100% fruit juice. There should not be any corn syrup added. There shouldn't be any, if you can't, cocktail, you should avoid, if you can avoid something from concentrate. But yeah, you want to, things you pointed out are good. Anything that's labeled cocktail or something that changes is something other than fruit, just simply, this one says simply orange, versus something that's got corn syrup or concentrated syrups that are used. And you can also look for the percentage of that it comes actually from fruit. So here's a 100% premium ruby red fruit juice or orange juice.
Great. All right, so now we're just about back to the dairy section. So the first thing we're going to come to is eggs. I personally love eggs. I think they're great protein for breakfast and snacks, but am I on the right track with that? Or are there rules we should look at, for a diabetes-friendly diet, like egg whites? Is that better than whole eggs, or what should we be thinking of?
You could probably get a variety of opinions if you talk to physicians, and I do believe, people in the cardiology field still have some really strong lingering from, years ago. We used to really demonize for a long time yolks and
the cholesterol
yolks and the saturated fat in yolks, and we still talk about that, but the evidence is not as strong as we really ever thought for how adamant we were for years and years about how eggs were a problem. So generally, I don't believe there's anything specific about eggs in the dietary guidelines for people who have a blood sugar problem. We do talk about limiting saturated fat. We talk about limiting cholesterol. When it comes to eggs, I generally tell my clients they could probably have 1 to 2 eggs up to 3 times a week. And if, sometimes, because I know it's something that some of the physicians I work with feel really strongly about, I'll say, you know, it doesn't ever hurt to have a conversation with your providers. Some providers are more interested in reading nutrition research in the field, or just have particular opinions about it. I tell people, if you want to eat a processed egg, and this is kind of where I spend probably some time, processed eggs can have sodium in them, they can have food coloring in them, you know, because really a carton of just egg whites doesn't look that great.
No, it looks pretty yucky.
And they usually have to put stabilizers and things. So, but I know some people that 5 grams of fat in an egg is something that troubles them. They would prefer for their diet not to get that. But I don't have a lot of prohibitions. The other thing I do tell people about eggs is finding organic eggs and probably paying the extra $2 probably per carton, depending on where you can get them, is worth it, for the same reason that we were talking earlier about, or I was talking at one point about, you know, what an animal's been exposed to ends up being in its flesh and in the things that it makes. And so hens that have, you know, been fed feed that has lots of hormones or antibiotics that helps them survive those types of conditions, that ends up being part of us, right? So if you're going to have, you know, reasonably, you know, eggs are going to be a corner of, you know, good solid protein for you, it's probably worth prioritizing finding organic eggs. And organic does mean that they were not raised with antibiotics or hormones. It's a variety about whether they were pasture raised or not, but pasture raised is also does tell you they've been out and they've foraged for part of their nutrition source.
So all kinds of little tips there.
Yeah,
so
eggs are good.
Eggs are good. That's a relief.
They're convenient and good.
So then, as we move down a little bit more, we come to a section that for me is overwhelming.
It is.
Yogurt section.
It lasts about 2 minutes by walking. No, it's a long section.
It does. It's long. But there's Greek yogurt and plain yogurt, and there's fruit and fat-free and low-fat. How do we know what to pick?
It's really scary just looking at it. I came by. The thing to remember, or a good way to start as a cautionary tale, is that a lot of yogurts that are in the case here have as much sugar as the ice cream that you refuse to let yourself look at.
Right.
So you want to, you know, a half a cup serving of plain, if you can find it, plain vanilla chocolate ice cream or yogurt frozen is 15 to 16 grams of carbohydrate. If you pick just a flavored yogurt,
Look, here's a plain one. And this one, if we look at the carbs, has 5 grams, whereas this one has 17. This is the cherry.
This is the same amount of carbohydrate in vanilla chocolate or strawberry ice cream.
That's crazy. I'd rather have ice cream.
So when you are looking in this section, you had asked me what I look for. I ask people to look for added sugar. I ask people to look for what are the first ingredients. So if you see corn syrup and cane sugar and those things as the first ingredients in a yogurt container, it's something to be savvy about. If you are willing, plain yogurt is a great choice, because then you can decide how much sweetener you decide to put in it, whether you use an artificial sweetener or a lower glycemic effect sweetener. Maybe you just put fresh fruit and a little stevia. But a lot of people are going to pick something quick and convenient. And so I generally tell people, try to make it have less than 15 grams of carbohydrate, because that's a reasonable, just milk, 8-ounce glasses of milk, 8-ounce glass of milk is going to be 12 to 15 grams of carbohydrate. So it does mean, though, that the sweetener in it was artificial. So that's something you have to be comfortable with.
And what about Greek yogurt versus plain?
I have not read anything that shows that Greek yogurt has a lower glycemic effect. It intuitively makes some sense in that there is a much higher amount. So they basically added a lot of non-fat milk solids to get Greek yogurts up to the 15 grams of protein and up. So there's more milk solids in there. You are getting more nutrition. I've not seen literature that says that Greek yogurt has a lower glycemic effect. It may be out there, but I have not read that.
Okay, so it's basically the protein level that's the difference between the two.
For me, that's the thing they sell it on, is that it's higher in protein and it may be more appetite satisfying, and that glycemic effect might be there. I just haven't read the literature.
So we did have a nice comment I'll just throw out there, that we hear that Mary is a wonderful Sweet Success educator. And Sweet Success, for those of you who don't know, is our pregnancy diabetes education program. So I agree.
Nice.
Mary's pretty amazing.
It's
so
my
thank
privilege.
you.
Really my privilege. Thank you very much. It's very nice.
All right, so we'll move down just a little bit more. We'll go past some of the more yogurts because we haven't got out of that
We
yet.
do have the alternate yogurts here.
Oh, I didn't even know there was such a thing.
Yeah, so it's kind of the milk you had asked about.
Oh,
We'll
right.
talk a little bit about coconut, almond, and soy milk. So you do have up here a bunch of almond milk yogurts, coconut milk yogurts, and soy yogurts. And it's very similar to when we talk about soy and coconut milk and alternate milk beverages, which the milk industry really wants us to call it beverages, not milk. We can talk a little bit about that. The thing to remember is that it really isn't milk the way you and I have talked about it, but it is a nice alternative for people that are lactose and casein intolerant. So we can talk about that. Yeah.
So, on that note, we're here in the milk section.
Oh, there we
So
go.
we do have a variety, very much like the yogurt, milk options. There's the cow, dairy, from everything from fat-free to full fat, and then like you just mentioned, the coconut milk, almond, soy milk. So how do we go about choosing what would be a good option for diabetes specifically?
For diabetes specifically, the main advice that we usually give our clients is to keep in mind that they should be trying to eat a lower fat diet. Do they have to manifest that in terms of milk in their diet? Not necessarily, but whenever you get a whole milk, you're going to get more saturated fat, you're going to get more cholesterol. A certain amount of that in the diet is okay. So it might be that when it comes to milk, you prioritize that you want to get the healthy fats that you can get from a whole milk. In fact, we were talking about that with a customer. So you might do that here. If you're a milk drinker and you're going to drink 2-3 glasses of milk a day and you enjoy a number of other fats, you might say, well, is there a lower fat milk that I could find? And even some of the cows that they market to, they're focusing on the organic industry, they'll even make a low-fat milk. So the recommendation to people in treatment for diabetes is generally a low-fat milk. You will run into medical providers who are adamant. They'll tell their clients you have to have non-fat, you have to have 1%. There's only a 2-gram fat difference between a 1% and a 2% milk.
Oh, that's not very much.
So it's not a very big change, but I do have clients who say, my doctor's adamant I'm supposed to have 1% milk, and I'm like, they're in charge.
That's okay.
Yeah, and you can get fortified, so you can get fortification in milk is something that's more easily readily gotten. Vitamin D is a vulnerable nutrient for people with blood sugar problems and the rest of us. So, it's an important, there's great choices here.
And then what about like the nut milks, the soy, the almond, you said cashew?
It's like
I
the
didn't even know
yogurt.
that.
Yeah, there's cashew, there's hemp, there's a number of other milks that they use a lot of places in the world. Again, it's like the yogurt. Look for added sugar.
Okay.
Look for added sugar.
I like vanilla, and I have noticed those really raise up the sugar count.
They do. You
Yeah.
can find unsweetened almond milks though that get the carb content in a cup to about 3 grams of carbs.
Oh wow.
So I would say, those are beverages that I would make sure there's not an added sweetener, and if there is an added sweetener or flavor that they demonstrate to you. Usually I tell even my pregnant mothers who are trying to find something, if it has less than 5 grams of carbs in a cup, it's something that they could probably fit in and still control their baby's blood sugar. So, and then they have something milk-like
Right.
in their diet.
Nice.
Yeah.
So let's take a little walk. We'll get out of the dairy section now.
The only thing I wanted, the other thing while I thought of it, is a lot of people think of milk as the best place to get calcium, and it's not. It's not the best.
Over this way.
Going this way?
Yeah,
We're
we're
going this
walk
way.
this way just a little bit.
So we're milk is a wonderful place to get calcium, don't get me wrong, but it is a high sodium, high protein whey, and that calcium isn't always as absorbable. So if you need, you can talk to a dietitian, or there's lots of good other sources of calcium. It doesn't always have to be milk, but milk is certainly there. It's just not always.
I think, isn't broccoli pretty high
Broccoli's
in calcium?
high in calcium. Almonds have calcium. There's a number of
Cheese.
dark
but that's milk.
greens. That's milk. Dark greens. Another one that people don't like to talk about is canned meat, so salmon. So if you use canned salmon, all that canned sardines, everybody wrinkles their nose.
Yeah.
But if those are things that every now and again, and their calcium in them is amazing.
Now
There's
there's tuna.
sesame seeds.
Is canned tuna? Does that have?
They don't put the bones in. It's really the fact that when they can salmon, they cook down the bones right in the salmon.
Interesting.
In the canned salmon.
So one other question while we're walking that comes up in the pre-diabetes classes that you do is, or not a question I guess, but you talk about to help manage is to balance protein and carbs together to help keep a stable blood sugar. So how does that work?
Yeah, that's one of the ways that you can lower what they call the glycemic load. We were talking about, you know, not eating 2 large handfuls of grapes, just eating 1 small handful of grapes. Another choice is to eat foods that don't have much of a glycemic effect. So proteins have, your body would prefer not to use protein as a way to stabilize, or as a way to get you blood sugar. It will, if the calories are not there, your body will take protein and ultimately help you get stable glucose. So you can use proteins or foods that are more protein rich. So those are meats, of course, and cheeses. You can use nuts, but you could also just use fiber-rich things. Those vegetables that you and I were struggling to get in our diet, you could try to have a vegetable. And like I said, anytime there's a vegetable, there's a lower blood sugar at the end of that meal. And then the other thing we forget about is fat. And so healthy fats like olives and avocados and nuts and nut butters and seeds, all of those things change the digestibility. And so the concept we use and the federal government is now using, the 4 food groups have gone away, the 7 food groups have gone away, the pyramid has gone away, and now we're here and we talk about the plate method. And so the plate method is something that everybody can look up online. There's tools there where you can map your own diet, but that's where lower glycemic effect comes from, that plate idea that says half of your plate should be vegetable. And everybody sees that and they go, ah, I can't do that.
But a half cup, I mean, that's adds up pretty fast, especially if it's lettuce and broccoli.
So if you have grilled asparagus and some salad, your piece of pizza, and a leftover piece of chicken, or, you know, tri-tip from last night's dinner, you've taken a very high glycemic effect food, pizza, yummy, 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 but you put it in a meal that's lowered the overall glycemic load and insulin requirement. So that's what we call a lowering the glycemic effect of a meal, or a low glycemic load meal, and it's called the plate method. Well, you could, if you URL'd or search engines plate method, you'll find an interactive website, a lot of different kinds of tools. And those would be a great, so that's the topic when we try to kind of talk about lower glycemic load or pairing foods together. It's so that you can lower the digestibility of a carbohydrate. If you just always think in terms of, is this something that'll digest fast? Is this a carbohydrate that's processed or will digest fast? Oh yeah, really digest fast. I want orange juice. I'm going to make sure, or the story I always, I want to have my latte, my foo latte.
She found me out.
Me too. And I'll say, okay, I have to have a hard-boiled egg, you know, or I have to have, you know, a fried egg sandwich or something. So it's kind of making yourself do those kinds of things.
So while we're here, this is something I noticed the other day when I came shopping. Yeah. There's this little handy section that has these pre-packaged snacks.
Yeah.
Now, it's got the meat and the cheese and the nuts and things. Yeah. Does something like that, if people are on the go and want something quick to grab, is that a good choice?
Well, let's look at some of them.
Lunchables, I think, are very high sodium.
Yeah. Let's see.
But what about, how about like this one up here?
You want to do the Sargentos?
Yeah. That looks more grown-up snack.
And then there's also these P3s. How about? So let's look at it together. So a lot of times, if you can try to avoid the flash on the front of a label, because this is all flash. This is like a neon sign.
It looks
trying
pretty
to draw
easy.
you in and turn it around to see, you know, see where the real rubber hits the road. And so something that you always want to look at, and what Deanna brought up and would be generally, is whenever they've packaged something for you, it's usually they've added quite a bit of sodium. And sodium's, it's right up there with glycemic effects of foods in terms of a hot topic with healthcare professionals, with doctors trying to help people be well.
Especially with heart disease, right? High sodium is bad.
Sodium is just something our body uses in balance with potassium. So sometimes what I'll tell people, and I'll see if we can find some things in the aisles we still have to look at, is whenever you can see something that has more potassium than sodium, so that's one of your strategies, is if you know you've got a sodium-rich diet, find potassium-rich fruits and vegetables to put in your diet. Eat more legumes because they're potassium-rich. There's some chips that, you know, if you're a chip eater, there's some bean chips. If you look at them, they have 230 milligrams of potassium to the 180 milligrams of sodium. And some doctors and my cardiovascular nurses friends will say, you know, that's cheating. But if you know you have a high sodium, it's realistic. If you have a high sodium diet, that's a strategy. So back to the worries I have right away. If you're aiming for 1,500 to 2,400 milligrams of sodium in a day, one serving, this is a whole package fortunately, one serving is 570. It's almost a third of your entire day. And some people might say, this is what I would eat for half of my day, and then I'm going to come home and eat dinner. And I'm like, oh, well, okay.
That's not a lot of food for half a day.
But, you know, when you figure, and really the sources of sodium are the cheese, which I think people just don't know unless they're a nutrition focus in their life. The cheese as well as the meat, you know, is where you're going to get a lot of sodium.
Well, and this is pretty high carbs. So you had mentioned 15 before, and this is 29. And only 12 grams of protein.
Right, yeah. So, and then of course, you know, saturated fat is also something to look at. I think that's probably another tour altogether about limiting saturated fat. And I find the most intuitive way to limit saturated fat is just be aware of the animal sources of fat you have in your diet, so the cheese and meat you eat, and then the amount of packaged food. So if you eat packaged food a lot, you do have to start looking more about, you know, did they add saturated fat to make this a yummy cracker that I like or a yummy cookie that I like? Because particularly packaged saturated fats are really, they're different than coconut oil saturated fat or naturally occurring saturated fat. It's a type of saturated fat that's really a problem for us metabolically.
Gotcha. So maybe not the best, not
maybe
terrible,
you could just buy your own
fat.
turkey, buy your own, you know, buy a nice organic smoked turkey is what and I just roll it up and put it in a snack size Ziploc bag.
Right.
And same with the nuts or a little Tupperware, and you know, and that way you sidestep some of them.
So one more thing, so down this aisle, we have canned vegetables.
Yes.
So we talked about how fresh is good because it's got the high fiber, it's got the high vitamins and things. How does that change when we're dealing with canned vegetables?
So the thing to remember about a canned vegetable is it's been cooked, and usually stabilizers, which are sodium rich, had to be added to it so that it could sit on a shelf. Exactly, shelves again. Interesting, in the Rayleigh store, if people want to come by and do the tour themselves, this is where canned meats are. We were talking about they might offer some things. The calcium rich, right? Or just maybe a good protein choice for the day that's convenient. So when I look at canned vegetables, you need to look for sodium. Is the short, straight to the, you know, you just need to be careful. You want to, you know, you're keeping in mind, you know, things that, the nice thing is that some of these Rayleigh products actually will list it right on the front. So they'll show you calories and servings, but they'll also go straight to sodium. They'll even tell you, right now this is natural as well as added sugar. Right? Sodium is the main issue when it comes to cooked and canned vegetables. And canned vegetables also are slightly lower, well, they're substantively lower in nutrients. If you're really looking to get fruits and vegetables for what they offer in terms of their cancer-fighting properties, anti-inflammatory properties, and even fiber, frozen vegetables, that's one thing my mom did do right. We grew up on frozen vegetables. There's a lot of frozen vegetables. And the reason why is a vegetable, from the time it's picked, it loses vitamins, it loses phytochemicals. So every time it's exposed to air and light, and anytime its temperature is changed. So the nice thing about a packaged frozen vegetable is it does that in less than 24 hours.
Oh.
It goes to a light obstructed, air obstructed, temperature controlled. So you're getting green beans.
Preserving the vitamins.
Green beans this time of year, not out yet. So if I want green beans, my best bet nutritionally is to get green beans out of the freezer case.
Now, I remember one of the pre-diabetes classes that I went to, you talked about the more times you cook a food, like you cook it and then you reheat it the next day for leftovers, that changes the glycemic index too, right?
That's right. You're bringing up very good points. Yeah. So the more, especially with a grain, but any type of a carbohydrate, so that could include a fruit, you know, or a vegetable. We're talking about carrots. So whenever you take something that's carbohydrate rich, and usually they will have their carbohydrate locked into fiber, if it's a fiber-rich thing. So when you and I cook it and we make it softer and more easy to digest, it's more readily digested to glucose, and so it shows up in the bloodstream faster because it's more mobilized. So, you know, even something like oatmeal, if you can lightly cook it, so, you know, basically, or even pasta that's cooked al dente, so it's just like a little bit of chew to it. I mean, I moaned that when I learned it because I love melt in my mouth angel hair.
But see, I like the chewy pasta.
I like chewy pasta too, but there's nothing like melt in the mouth angel hair or those lovely raviolis that just slide out of the package into the boiling water. You know, and those are really nice, but you know, it's just, you know, when they melt in your mouth, just know they're going to melt right into sugar in your bloodstream.
I think we were going to talk about pasta, and I think we skipped that out. I was looking up here. So I don't know, maybe we want to go back over here just
quickly.
because
yeah, there's an end cap with some. some end cap with some. Yeah, pastas and sauces.
So we can just, although I don't know if they have the wheat. That was one of the things, because again, you brought
Yeah, we
that
can scoot
up.
down. It's right there.
Yeah.
Always be
Another tip I learned from the pre-diabetes
And
class.
here's another processed vegetable.
Bad.
So whenever there's an end cap, beware of end caps. Doesn't mean it might not have something good, but an end cap usually, and when they're going to give it to you, you know, more affordably, look how many milligrams of sodium is in this sauce.
Oh yeah, 500 almost again.
And that's in a serving, not in the whole jar. So if we look on the back and we look at how many, it'll tell you that there's 5 servings. So that means that actually you need to multiply.
2,500 milligrams.
And also we were talking about sugar. Fortunately, this has tomato puree first, and then it has tomatoes. It doesn't list sugar until the 3rd ingredient. But there are tomato sauces on these aisles where cane syrup or sugar will be a first ingredient. So I tell our clients, always look for a tomato sauce where at least the first ingredient is ground up tomatoes. And then look for added sugar, and then of course when you can, limit sodium. It does make you go, well, maybe I should just buy a can of chopped tomatoes and cook it down on the stove with my favorite spices. Now we're on pasta.
Now we're on pasta. So, kind of like the yogurt, there's a lot of pasta to choose from. So, what are we looking for when we're looking at pasta choices?
When it comes to pasta, you are welcome to pick, you know, semolina, angel hair. It doesn't, how it's cut up is not necessarily as worrisome. And but the thing to remember is cook it from dry, because that you then can cook it al dente. The other things is don't be misled by things that say spinach or red pepper, because really that's just puree. It's spinach puree.
Okay, I'm guilty of that. I
Well,
always thought that was good.
Well, if you're guilty, it doesn't mean you don't get the extra vitamins, because you can find vitamins on a label right down here. So you can find vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, and iron.
And these are 0 and 0. That's not very good.
Exactly. So, but when you look on here, you see durum, semolina, and then organic spinach powder. So
it's not really
intuitively
spinach.
in your mind, you're like, spinach, that'd be great. Actually, it'd be good if you took
Put
your
the
own
spinach
baby
in it.
spinach in it. So when you see something like this is a flavoring. It's not really something that's adding fiber to the product. It's just a flavor ingredient. The other thing to look at is you can look for things that are wheat if you would like.
I've seen that, like here, we've got a whole grain one.
I have a whole grain one, and it does have more fiber, but what you'll find is it's not the kind of fiber that's going to lower glycemic effects. Let's find out later. So you've got 5 grams of dietary fiber, and that definitely is better than something that says 0. Most of this, though, is insoluble fiber, which is good to help you be regular with your stools, your and those types of things, but it's not the soluble fiber that'll slow digestibility of this pasta.
So it still doesn't help manage your
If you
blood
want to slow the
sugars.
digestibility of a pasta, you could combine it in a meal the way we were talking about, or I'll put lentils in mine. I mean, they serve that in Italy all the time, lentils and pasta, and you can buy, they have pre-made lentils that are easy to make, or the red lentils cook up in 5 minutes, and you just turn them into a sauce or right into your what you're making. So do we have enough time to get to cereals and breads?
Just a couple aisles over.
Any other specific questions? I mean, there are ones you can look. There are now some that are made from edamame, so made out of soybeans, and there are now wonderful pastas made from legumes. And pasta made from legumes are like the pastas made from, or the chips I told you that are made from beans. These are worth trying, because they do offer soluble fiber, because lentils and legumes are a soluble fiber source.
Nice.
So you don't need to focus on them because of a gluten-free or a gluten, you know, they just offer you that nice sticky gummy, lowers how fast this carb will get into digest.
All right, well, let's take a walk and we'll go over, I think it's just a couple aisles over, and we'll talk about cereal. Because cereal is one of those things that people ask you every single time we have the diabetes classes.
Well-
Can I have my morning cereal?
Right. And what I always tell them first in line I said is, you know, there wasn't any breakfast till there was dry cereal, right? I mean, I grew up on dry cereal. I grew up begging for Captain Crunch, and you know the whole. But the reality is, it's an aisle that I have family history of diabetes. I have personal risk factors for diabetes, and actually a third of the American population is at risk for is at risk for prediabetes. So it's not an aisle that I go in a lot, but I did because we need to. But as a rule, most of the things in this aisle are some of the highest glycemic effect food you can have. Even the things here that are not sweetened, grape nuts. You feel like you're going to break your teeth eating grape nuts, but grape nuts will give you one of the highest glycemic effects around. So the thing to look out for...
So that's bad.
That's bad.
Oh, see, I thought that was good. So.
Well, one of the reasons why is a lot of these cereals are made from wheat. Wheat has one of the highest, separate from rice, and we don't make a lot of cereals from rice. Wheat, when it's processed, and so keep in mind, whenever you take something that would not be digestible in its natural form and you make it exceptionally digestible, you're going to turn it into a high glycemic effect food. So what I tell people, and this usually resonates, dry cereal is the juice version of whole grain. Dry cereal, anytime you can put a grain in a box and it's soggy in a bowl and milk in less than 2 to 5 minutes, you've got a problem. You've got a high glycemic effect carb that's now soggy in a bowl and you can eat it very rapidly.
That makes sense.
So if you can push that aside, you can. The other thing to keep in mind is some of your best choices are up high. All the ones they want you to buy are in here. The kids are right here, right? So keep in mind, just where they're putting them so you can see them. So some of the best ones, I was in here the other night, bran flakes, not sexy, but if we get it down here and we look at it, we've got high amounts of fiber, most of it insoluble. The first ingredient here is whole grain wheat. So we didn't use a flour or a processed anything to make it. Fiber One has done the same thing. Fiber One, the original. And the other thing, we added sugars. So sugars are 5. Yeah. And this one also, sodium and potassium are balanced, 170 and 170. 5 grams of sugar or less is the general rule of thumb for a dry cereal, and that's for a person that doesn't have a blood sugar problem. You just should not be buying and eating all the time dry cereal that has more than 5 grams. But if you take Fiber One, this is what Fiber One used to look like, and you look at that, it's got 14 grams of fiber in it, and it has 0 grams of sugar in it, and its first ingredient is whole grain wheat. But then you go to Fiber One honey clusters. Anybody got bets on this?
I think that's going to be high sugar content.
44 grams of carbohydrate, more sodium than potassium, and 9 grams of added sugar. And it's got whole grain wheat, oat clusters, sweetened oat clusters is the second ingredient. So I don't want to be a Debbie Downer about dry cereal, but it's like fruit juice.
Something we want to just limit.
Just know it. Maybe it's the perfect thing that you take when you know you're going out for a run, or you and your kids are going out to the soccer game and you guys are going to be running around. Unfortunately, it's the same for processed and flavored cooked cereal. If you look at any of these, you're going to find very high amounts of sodium and very high amounts of sugar. So here, 270.
Well, good
it's good potassium, but can you imagine? I mean, this is oatmeal. It should have less than 50 grams of sodium in it.
Yeah, it's got over 200.
And they're making you pay $2.39 for a cup.
Because convenient, it's fast.
It's convenient. So when you can, just again, keep in mind that whenever it's got, added, here it's got added sweeteners. If we look at these later, it also has added sodium.
Is it dead? Okay, I think we're back. So we lost you for a minute, but we're back. And I know we're running low. We're running late on time, but such good information. So we're hoping you're sticking with us. And of course, we're going to be posting this on the video section later. So if you need to come back and watch, we'll do that too.
I think we can check breads. Breads
are
right on the other
breads
side.
Are going to be on the other side. We're also heading into the protein, the fresh meats. So maybe
nut butters there too.
Oh yeah, nut butters.
Natural nut butters of every sort and variety here. And some really good, so the big reason to go in the cereal aisle is good cooked cereals. But I tend to, because of the process, what I try to do is I'll just use leftover grains from dinner meals. So like if I cook a quinoa or a rice, we'll cook a long grain brown or a basmati, I'll just use leftover rice as a cooked cereal in the morning. And then I don't have to buy as much prepared cereal. But plain old cartoned rolled oats works really well.
I like that too. I do tend to, in the summertime, I like to put the berries in it. Berries seem to be my go-to favorite all summer long.
Well, the nice thing is rolled oats are processed enough that you can just put a little bit of liquid and put them in the microwave, and That's really how they use them in Northern Europe. Rolled oats with a little bit of nuts and a little bit of fruit, operative term, is muesli in the Scandinavian countries, and that's how they usually eat that cereal. And they can eat it cold or they can eat it raw cooked.
Nice. So we're in the meat. We've got bread on one side and fresh meats on the other. So maybe let's talk a little bit about meat first, because we've got everything from chicken and pork and beef to the fresh seafood counter.
Right.
So protein, we've talked already about how that is so important to help balance our blood sugars. Are there things we should keep in mind when we're choosing what type of meat to look for?
The one thing to keep in mind is that lower fat meats are a recommendation. I think that's been out there for so long that most of us are aware of that. The other is the percent. When they say is a certain percent fat beef,
right.
That's percent by weight. It's not percent by terms of grams of fat. And so, the more lean, when you go 80% fat beef is pretty greasy beef. There's a lot of fat left in it. So, be cautious about, choosing.
How you cook it, maybe too.
You could also ask your butcher counter. I know that's a seafood counter, but I do believe, if you're uncertain about cuts of meat and what would be leaner cuts of meat, I always use my butcher.
Yeah,
other than, as a nutritionist, I know a little bit about cuts of meat, because what part of the animal you eat matters a great deal. So, if you eat pork tenderloin, you can get almost to the amount of grams of fat that you get from some poultry cuts.
So very lean.
So yeah, very lean. When I think a lot of us think, oh no, pork's got a lot of fat. Actually, pork doesn't have as much fat as you.
Oh, see, I always thought pork was one of the leaner ones.
It is a leaner one. And then the cut of cow or beef that you get matters. And then if it really is, if you buy a cow that's been grass-fed its entire life, it does make healthy fats. It makes omega-3 fats. So if you go to a butcher counter where they do feature some, and there are some local farms that do raise just animals who have just been grass-fed, but grass-fed animal makes good fats in its flesh. So if you're a beef eater, you might really consider prioritizing that, or you could. Game meat is a wonderful, you're not going to find game meat here, but we live in a part of the country that a lot of people do hunt, and game meats are generally lean. Other than waterfowl, game meats are all going to be lean, and they're all going to have healthy fat in their tissue.
I think some of those you can get down at the farmer's market.
You
like
can.
You said, some of the local ranchers, maybe S&S
Yep.
might be an option. So they are out there. They are definitely accessible if that's the kind of meat you're looking for.
I think the thing sometimes that's difficult is it takes the preparation. It takes some thinking about it, preparing it, storing it safely, cooking it safely. But it's a great option. And for me, I have to rely a lot on my butcher counter and then planning. How much freezer space do I have?
Eating, though, it does take some planning.
It's like a hobby. Yeah. It kind of takes a little extra time.
So what about people who are vegetarians? What might be some good options for them in getting protein, since we're talking about that?
Well, legumes are a great place to go. So that legumes is a more international term for beans, lentils, edamame, that category of food. Hummus is something that's taken on a world. It's almost the size of the yogurt section. There's a lot of options in the hummus section. We walked by in the freezer case. They do make meat like, so there's veggie burgers. Trying to find my words for that. Veggie burgers made from grains, veggie burgers made from tofu.
Are those healthy?
They can be. You need to look for your sodium, and you need to look for the fats. But generally, those companies know that people that go looking for that are usually looking for those kinds of things. So there's a couple of, like any food product, identifying a manufacturer, identifying a store that carries your preferred brands makes it easier to stay on track with that. So I noticed some of the brands that we buy at our house, here they're not a priority, so they don't take as much of the shelf space, and they don't have the same price point on them here, because it's just, so you kind of find your spots is a good one for that kind of stuff. So legumes they use, nuts they use, tofu works well, tempeh works well. You could use the natural food stores in town to give you some more of those options. The Natural Food Co-op downtown between Broadway and Main, and the New Earth Market that's out at the Cohasset Walgreens. They have a great selection of different alternatives. So they kind of, depends on the vegetarian. If they're a vegan, they have other, they have to even work a little bit harder to eat a wider variety and mostly not packaged food, because they're going to miss nutrients. They just need to eat more healthy. And all of us do need to eat more whole food.
So then we have the breads. I think the breads probably be a lot along the lines of the
It's
cereal
like the
that we were just
cereal,
talking
but
about.
I did spot the good ones. So it can be challenging if you have a particular. Sometimes you have to come on bread day to make sure that you're. But breads that we feature a lot for our diabetes folks are breads where the first ingredient's not flour, because flour is definitely the juice version of a whole grain.
Because it's been processed so
It's been
much.
processed. So Ora wheat, you can see, has a lot of different brands. There's lots of different types of Ora wheat. But Ora wheat, what they call a Master's Best line. Winter wheat is one of their Master's Best. And when you...
And that one says right on it, no high fructose corn syrup.
No high fructose corn syrup, no trans fat. A lot of people won't pick it because it's a smaller loaf. But if you hold this, feel how heavy this is.
Ooh, that's a dense bread.
That's a dense bread. And yet, if you turn it around and if you look at the ingredients, you're going to find that the first thing is whole wheat cuts. So literally, they've taken a wheat berry, which is really what a wheat kernel is, and they've cut it, but they have not made it ground to a flour. Smushed it to a flour, soaked in.
That's a technical term, smushed it up.
Smushed it up. So, but some people would get concerned because you're going to see brown sugar here. But what you're going to find is sugar does not have as high a glycemic effect as wheat flour, whereas most grain flours.
And it's better than the corn syrup, which has been omitted from this
Exactly.
one.
So it's not to say that sugar is a great thing, but when you make a bread, you actually have to put a little bit in there to feed the bacteria that help rise the bread. So sugar, you just kind of want to be careful about always presuming that sugar is the most problematic ingredient for glycemic problems. Flour really is a much more problematic ingredient. So there's the Master's Best, and then there's this is Ora wheat honey wheat berry. They've stuck their coupon sticker right over it, but it's Ora wheat honey wheat berry.
That one tastes really good.
And it's a very good. But again, a lot of people are drawn more to a larger loaf, but a larger loaf, has its considerations as well.
Yeah, portion control, I know, just speaking for me personally, that's kind of one of the hardest things when I'm talking about the healthy diet. Mm-hmm. So having a smaller bread, that helps because it starts you off on a good path.
It does. It makes it easier. It makes you have to go back to the bag to get the next slice if that's what you're really going to have to do.
So we're getting...
One last thing would be, if you can't get a whole grain bread, and you cannot get any whole grain bread at any commercial setting. So if you go out to get a sandwich today for lunch, it may have lots of crunchies and yummies on the surface, but it's not whole grain. They just don't sell it. It's impractical for a restaurant. Sourdough works.
Oh, good.
Because the acidity, whenever you can change or lower the pH of a food, so you can add pickles, sauerkraut, kimchi, things that make that food and that meal more acidic. Good sour starter, so real deal sourdough bread. It's a great option.
That's a lower glycemic
index option. You do run into slices that are, one slice here looks like two slices. So you have some of those issues. And then the other thing to help you with glycemic effect would be try not to get a roll. If you're going to eat out and you're going to, or maybe get a roll and just know maybe I'll eat half, I'll eat the top, or I'll eat half of the sandwich. So, sorry, you were saying.
No, that's okay. I was saying we're at an hour now, so we probably want to finish up, but we're at the end of the store too. One thing, just as we're walking out, before we say goodbye, is we've got this lovely deli that a lot of the grocery stores have. So people who want a quick option, they've got salads and meats and sandwiches and all kinds of stuff. Is there a way to use the convenience of these sections and make healthy choices?
You can. You have to be careful. I came in and I, looked around on a couple of occasions. It's a store I frequent. They do offer a salad bar.
Yep.
And they do offer in the prepared section. What I often will use deli cases for is a good cut of meat. And they make vegetable dishes there. So they have a green bean, almondine down here. They have a couple of cabbage salads down here. Those are the kinds of things that I would pick out of a deli case. Other things are things that, higher glycemic effect, things that you want to be more careful about. Thing to remember about sushi, and they have a big sushi bar here, they feature it quite a bit, is that sushi is made from the highest sugar rice that you can get. Sushi rice is sugar grains, that's why it's sticky. And even though it's got a wee bit of some sashimi or something in the middle, that's not a very good balance. So if you decide to do sushi, decide to have a couple rolled up pieces of turkey, or leftover tri-tip from dinner last night, because
sushi, protein.
Yeah, because sushi is really the carby part of the meal, even though you find some balance. Yeah, it seems like, well, if there's a little
fresh
bit
and healthy.
There's a lot more rice in that, and it's delicious. I really am not an aficionado, but it's a nice option. And I think they do offer, just some sashimi or some meats over there, but that.
So
and
there's lots of options.
There's options, and then there's carbs up and down the middle section.
We'll just put our blinders on and not look at that right now.
Balance.
Exactly. So I guess that's a couple of the things, takeaways that we want to leave with. Balance, moderation are huge.
Shop the perimeter.
Yeah.
Always come with a list, and never shop hungry.
Never.
Which is what we're doing right now.
I know, because it's lunchtime.
So, and it doesn't say that I shop hungry all the time, but I think you should just know that you'll come home with a half a bag or more groceries than you planned.
Yeah.
And, so try to hold yourself to the discipline of a list. It'll help you a lot. And those are things, and the perimeter of the store offers you more. Beware, the minute you go down aisles, you were with us in the bread aisle, and the cereal aisle, and the vegetables, you just kind of need to know where you're going. Know where you're going, get your stuff, and then leave.
Yeah.
Beware end caps as well, because end caps are great for the store. They feature wonderful things. They might be right for you, but they might not, and they weren't on your list. Be careful.
So just look at the labels, know what you're looking for.
Absolutely.
If you want more in-depth information, we will have our next pre-diabetes class.
Yes,
that's an hour and a half of really great information, a chance to ask questions. Mary teaches a lot of those classes along with other members of our diabetes services team. So the next one is Thursday, April 19th. We do have information and the RSVP on our website. So that's at www.enloe.org/events. So we encourage you to sign up, come join us for that, learn more. We hope you learned a lot today that you can use